Welcome back. My next guest is Nestor Aparicio. Always doing great things over the airwaves. You catch him on LinkedIn and all the other great things he does. Nestor, welcome in.
LinkedIn, huh? How
Yeah,
about
I,
LinkedIn?
I
My
follow you.
LinkedIn's on Fuego this week, man.
I love LinkedIn. I mean, I get a lot of motivational stuff on there. I follow you and a lot of other great people on LinkedIn. It's a great site. As I'm down to two, I think I'm on X now, which is not no longer Twitter, and LinkedIn. But between those two, I get enough of my social media fixes I need.
Yeah, I got thrown off of Twitter when I wrote about Lamar Jackson telling the guy in Pennsylvania to perform, like
Ah,
all
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
I got
yeah.
thrown off, right? It was a Christmas gift to me to get thrown. So NXT's still on, but I'm not anymore. And then when I thought about signing back up, it's kind of like, paying $10,000 to get my press pass back or something. It's just
I
something
hear you.
ethically I'm not
Well,
begging to be on a platform, but I would say this about LinkedIn. Every time I go to post something there, I wonder, is it work related? Is it, and almost everything in my life other than the gold watermelon that I'm looking forward to sharing with you, and peach cake. I don't put that stuff or my cat up on LinkedIn, but like everything I do sort of work, right? Like everything we do on the platform, everything I talk about, things networking. I mean, I was down at Mako last week, and I mean that's really like a very centered place for LinkedIn because everybody's there trying to advance their business, their cause, their status, their lobby, their influence, like all of that's going on down there. But everybody's taking a picture with everybody, at least before it gets dark, and putting it up and showing that they're out amongst people. And I think, especially during the plague, right on the other end of the plague, networking events and getting out, it has been it's been a place of sanity for me to
yeah,
run a
yeah.
business and walk into a room full of business people and discuss legitimate things as opposed to sometimes what I would get from phone calls on the air about how the Orioles are run and how the sausage is made and how Kevin Brown was thrown off the air and me having to explain it to people that just are kayfabe. Have to explain to them that Vince McMahon owns the WWE. He's not the announcer.
Now,
You know?
talking about that, the great Terry Funk passed away. So let's talk about that for
Oh,
a second. Right, Terry Funk, a WWF, WWE legend, gone too soon, Nestor.
sometimes you get me into storytelling mode. So I have a Terry Funk story. Okay.
Come on, let's hear it.
So I think I've told you. Well, I love professional wrestling, right?
Of
When I was
course,
a
we
kid.
all do.
So this is from, and by the way, I found the picture of the old Civic Center from the summer of '76. It had a Kiss date, July 13th. It had a professional wrestling date. It was the old gold frontage on the Baltimore front street side before the renovation happened, about 78, 79, 80 in that range, where they changed the logo and the old caged box offices went away, right? So 1983, my father came home from work and we'd already been to Disney World when I was a kid. And like my parents didn't really vacation much. My dad was more 1919, Soup Lines 1929. My dad didn't vacation. He didn't like get on airplanes and fly to Europe. They went to Venezuela one time to meet my family in 1973. It was the most exotic thing my family ever did was get on that Pan Am plane out of Miami and land in Maracaibo, Venezuela. You know what I mean? Like, so that's the most exotic thing my family ever did. But the second most exotic thing I ever did with my parents, who, my pop and my mom in Dundalk, and they were much older, was in the summer of '83. So I'm 14 years old and I love baseball and I love music and I loved wrestling and I loved traveling and I loved American history, specifically American history. And my dad said, "We'll go anywhere you want to go. We'll go on vacation. You plan it." I went over to Walden's bookstore and I got a mobile travel guide. And I had a fascination with the Gateway Arch at that point in my life and traveling and Mississippi and Mark Twain and and the St. Louis Cardinals, both of them, because there was two of them then. Um, and baseball. And my mother always loved the fountains at Royal Stadium. The Royals are really good, 78,
Mhm.
79, 80, George Brett, Willie Wilson, all of that's going on then. And my father loved baseball, so anything, if I said to my dad, let's go on a baseball trip, my dad had never heard of such a thing. I think he did look up like in sporting news, because my dad got Baseball Register, Sporting News, Baseball Digest, all of those. Every time I have Howard Balzer on, every time I have Barry Bloom on, those were bylines when I was a boy in the magazines my father would have delivered to the house. In addition to the Wrestler and Inside Wrestling that came delivered, and when they didn't, I went to Drug City to get them. Or into Highlandtown to Whitey's newsstand, or the old editions at Marty's place, John Allen's Uncle Marty, next to Epstein's. So baseball cards, baseball, 1983. My dad in the spring says, plan a trip. My parents didn't drive. They never drove in their life, let alone fly, right? So we took the Greyhound bus out of the Greyhound terminal with the old televisions that sat in there, 2 blocks from the arena, about a block and a half from where that marquee was, 2 blocks from where your family was in Lexington Market. And we took the Greyhound bus out to St. Louis and to Kansas City. And when I bought tickets online ahead of, not online. What the hell am I saying? It was 1983.
I bought 83, you didn't.
I bought tickets in the mail. Okay. I called the Royals and they mailed me schedules and a form to mail for tickets. I ordered tickets, the Cardinals, and I left this part out. I was a Philadelphia Phillies fan. Summer of 83. All right. So that should, I'm wearing red today too, which really brands me wrong. So I love the 80 Phillies, and my father took me, my Venezuelan father came here and he knew Manny Trio and took me up to Philadelphia and got me autographs from Mike Schmidt, Dick Ruthven, all, Manny Trio, Bo Diaz, Greg Lazinski, all those guys, right? So 1983 in the summer, I planned this trip to St. Louis. And we stayed at the Roadway Inn that's now gone. I go out there and I eat barbecue and drink to honor my parents because it was such a great trip. We walked up and down the main street there and drank lemonade, went up in the Gateway Arch, went to the Budweiser Brewery, did all these things. But when we landed, I bought the newspaper because I was a newspaper geek. I was a year out from getting a job at the newspaper at 15. And I bought the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and there was an ad in there for professional wrestling the next night. And we were sitting on tickets to like probably see Steve Carlton pitch. It was like that era but we had tickets for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And the Saturday night matches, and they had the card. And I'm going to tell you who was on the card in a minute, because the card in the end becomes legendary. And if I tell Chris Pikey, he'll find the ad in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and I'll have it for you in the next week, because you're giving me homework now because it involved Terry Funk. So we got to the Roadway Inn, and I had all these tickets. My dad had paid $6 for those terrace box seats for that Saturday afternoon game at Busch Stadium with 38,000 people. And, Cardinals, Phillies, it was probably the game of the week. It's probably Tim McCarver and like all that. But my dad was like, let's go to we love wrestling. And I'm like, my dad's like, we'll ditch the tickets. And we sold them to the concierge for $5 or whatever at the hotel. He's like, glad to take them. He made a few bucks on them or whatever. And my dad and I walked down to the Kiel Auditorium because the concierge says, oh, it's about 6 blocks away. We walked down to the Kiel Auditorium. We had to get tickets, right? And we walked up to the box office, and the guy's like, sir, we have some ringside seats available if you want. They're $9. My dad's like, Dad, did your dad like look in the wallet and
of course,
not right, not like
dollar at a time,
right?
Yeah.
Pulls out the $27. My dad's like, we're on vacation. Let's get a lemonade.
Let's go.
We walk back. We get to the wrestling matches, and this is a time in my life during that period at 83 or 84 where I had a really good camera. I had a Pentax 130. I had a JCPenney. I developed so much film, the lady knew me. I took concert pictures of Van Halen, Aerosmith, like all those bands, because I love music and sports. And my parents took me out to St. Louis, and that night at the wrestling matches, Hulk Hogan, Harley Race wrestled Ric Flair. Okay? So like Hulk Hogan's on the card with Terry Funk, Baron von Raschke, Blackjack Mulligan. They're all on this card that night. And I camped out outside with my camera and took pictures of them all coming in. I have pictures of Hulk Hogan out in the street. I have pictures of Ric Flair out in the street. I have a picture of Terry Funk. I have to find the pictures of Terry Funk being a part of that card. Jack Briscoe was on that card. You know, it was all
It's a great
NWA,
card.
right?
Yeah,
So
sounds
it
like
was
a
an
great card.
NWA 1983 Kiel Auditorium, and I have pictures of it all. And it involved baseball, it involved St. Louis, it involved my mom wanting to drink Budweiser, it involved my mom wanting to see the fountains in Kansas City. I saw Don Sutton and Gaylord Perry pitch in a doubleheader on a Monday night. We paid $2 for 2 games. We took the bus out of downtown Kansas City out to, because we didn't drive anywhere. We took the Greyhound into Kansas City. We took the Greyhound everywhere in Kansas City, and I have all
This
these wacky pictures
sounds like a great road trip you
of
guys
my
had.
parents wearing these funky ass
Yeah,
1980s polyester.
that's good stuff. That's good stuff. Doesn't get much better than
The
that, man.
Terry Funk was on the card, and but I think Terry Funk. I saw him wrestle at the arena a few times later in his career. He was in and out. I mean, a legend. And you and I talked about losing superstar Billy Graham a few weeks ago. By the way, when I Googled this, because wrestling shows up, because Luke spends half his time on Twitter goofing around with wrestling stuff, so my Twitter's filled with wrestling feed, and then I wind up feeding into it with the ring thing that goes on with the Vice and like all that. And oh, my YouTube, Greg the Hammer Valentine shows up on my YouTube. I don't know why, but I didn't know Bob Backlund had some real dementia issues, right? Did you know
Oh,
this?
first I'm hearing of it. Never knew.
Well,
Never heard of it
apparently
before.
he got up at Vern Gagne's um at his when he passed away at this funeral, and did like a heel take, and people were worried about him, and he's been out of sight. I mean, like, I
Is
had
that right?
Bob on the
Huh.
show. I had Bob on the show. I'd have to look. I mean, 11, 12, 13, 14, somewhere in there. Bob Backlund came on with me for a long time and was very kayfabe. You know what I mean? It was very like I have the interview, but I hadn't thought about whether it was really like all together. I mean, late in Chuck Thompson's life, and Ray, can I promote something?
Sure.
Ray Bachman, whom I love, who was my long time producer, helped me really seed and grow WNST, and I love Ray. There's always a cold beer waiting for Ray. Um, and so Ray's coming and doing the show on Tuesday at Pappas. We're going to be at Pappas in Glen Burnie. We're bringing Anne Arundel County Executive Stuart Pittman, who I saw at Mako last week. We're going to talk to him about his county and things going on in Annapolis and Glen Burnie, Pasadena, and on and on and on and on. So Ray's going to come out. But Ray one time booked Chuck Thompson on late in Chuck's life. And Chuck's always, I mean, Chuck was a magnanimous, beautiful man. And he always had his little bobblehead. And I would always play the three little, ain't the beer cold, go to war, Miss A. The bobblehead had three sayings, you know what I'm saying? So I don't even know what the third one was, but either way,
Huh.
I still have the bobblehead here, right? And so we called Chuck, and Chuck was not well, you know what I mean? And we put it on the air. We were live. This is when we did live radio. Ray gave me the, hey, man, we got to get him off the air. And I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, Chuck, and I went to break, and we never talked about it again. You know what I mean?
Chuck Thompson, right before he passed away, Nestor, I was playing golf with some friends of mine at the Timbers of Troy, and he was in a foursome in front of me, and I got a chance to meet him, and like you said, he was just a magnificent gentleman. He really was very kind. Took time with me and my group, and took some pictures, and I treasure the meeting with him.
I have a picture. I think it's the only picture I have with Chuck Thompson that I treasure. I did the Nice Guy Awards. And by the way, while we're plugging, can I plug something? I meant to send you this.
You can plug anybody you want. Look, talk about Pappas. We were just there the other night.
Were you? Which one though? Not Glen Burnie?
Glen Burnie, of course.
You were at Glen Burnie?
Closest to my house. Yeah, because I always get the grilled octopus appetizer. They have great crab cakes, and that was my meal.
Well, thank you. That's good. They're our sponsor, and I appreciate that. And
Sure.
And Justin and Steve and everybody there. So we'll be there on that. So good.
Nice.
So I'm doing this 25th anniversary, and I'm doing these 25 stories of glory, of all the really cool things we've done that maybe, I mean, you probably know about 24 of them, right? You know what I mean? There might be one. You're like, hey, I don't remember the time you brought Deion Sanders to Putty Hills. So I sent the list to like 5 intimate friends in my life, like my insiders that have been with me 25 years, that would have remembered every single part of all of this. former employees Ray was one of them, Andy Mueller. And Andy writes me back. He's like, you left Radio Row off your 25. And I'm like, oh. And then Ray Bachman's like, dude, oh, this is great. You'll love this because it's wrestling related. He's like, and Ray writes in a vernacular where a lot of F-bombs drop out. So I'm going to do it in Ray-ese. Ray writes to me, you had Nikolai effing Volkov at the bowling event you did at Pinland, and Michael Jackson showed up in a tuxedo, and Dave Johnson and I bowl with Al Bunbury, and you're going to tell me that that's not one of the top 25 moments in WNST history? And I'm like, so I'm trying to like go through all of these incredible moments we've had, right? But the Ray Bachman, he's coming out this week. We're going to tell some old stories. We're trying to delineate what's real and what's fiction about like all the years of doing this and the kayfabe part of it. But the wrestling part of it, Ray booked Bob Backlund on the show. Ray booked Chuck Thompson on the show. And that night of the Nice Guy Awards that I met Chuck Thompson, the one time, not I didn't meet Chuck. I knew Chuck from around. He knew my name. I remember him saying, first time he said my name in his voice, it was like the first time John Unitas said it. I was like, oh my God, did he just say my name? Did he just greet me by my name? Is that John Unitas doing that? So when Chuck Thompson saw me, the last time I really saw him, that we took a picture, and it's me, Chuck, and Don Moeller. And it's this beautiful picture of the three of us at the Nice Guy Awards. And at that Nice Guy Awards, we had Art Donovan, David Modell, Cal Ripken, Brian Billick, and we're all on the dais. But more than that, that night I gathered every trophy. So it's 2004. Mike Flanagan was there. I remember Larry Bigby's in the pictures. He was the honoree that year. Of course, Elrod was there. But we had, and this is the only time it's ever happened, ever. And Mike Gibbons would confirm this. We had the Colts Super Bowl trophy. We had the Ravens Super Bowl trophy. We had the Orioles World Series trophy. And we had the Woodlawn vase. The Woodlawn vase never leaves like Pimlico. We had them all in one place to take pictures for $10 for Ed Block. So we raised money.
Mm-hmm.
So we did this at the Nice Guy Awards, and that night I took a picture with Chuck. And,
nice.
You don't forget, you take one picture with Chuck, but he came on and wasn't well. And Bob Backlund, I guess getting back to the original story, which was just sort of like wrestlers and like head trauma. And I worry for football players. And,
Sure.
there's a member of the Ravens family from my era before they threw me out. That is struggling and someone that I care deeply, deeply about, So I just, that stuff worries me. And you see these wrestlers expiring and, they live tough lives. And the Iron Sheik, we talked about him a couple weeks ago, and Superstar Billy Graham, now Terry Funk. We've done a whole wrestling segment. You haven't even that's good because we talked enough
It
about
is good. It is
right?
good. Yeah, it's a great distraction. And look, I'm glad that Terry Funk made it to 79. I hope it was a healthy 79. And I'm saddened to hear about the condition of Bob Backlund. I just looked him up on the web. His latest pictures, he doesn't look well.
Yeah, and I mean, and Bob Backlund was so nice to me when I was young, and I wrote about wrestling. He used to hang out at Stabil's in Highlandtown. Remember Stabil's?
Of course I
It
do.
was
Yes.
country music. He
Yes.
loved
Is that
country
right?
music. Oh yeah,
Bob
I
Backlund's the
interviewed Bob
Bills.
a few
That's
times
crazy.
during the era for the paper because I wrote stories at the News America, and then Kevin Eck took over, and he's the greatest who's ever done it. Because Kevin loves wrestling and still loves wrestling and a true historian, and my best friend growing up. But anytime I told you about the time I interviewed Ric Flair, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I literally Gary Juster was the promoter back in the day who brought Georgia Championship Wrestling and the NWA into the Baltimore Civic Center. And that was almost like there were territories, and they were called territories probably for a reason, right?
Look, those were the days, Nestor. I'd go down to the Civic Center twice a month. I'd watch the WWF and also the NWA. So when it was a cheap ticket, as you said, it was a very cheap ticket and a great time for all that went to those events.
I'm going to leave you on the wrestling note with this, and we can talk. I can talk. It's your show. We talk about whatever you want. But when I was clicking around, and I hate to say this out loud because I know my phone's listening. I clicked on a YouTube Ken Patera piece talking about Bob Backlund, which is why I sort of like was, because Bob was always like nice to me, right? And I knew he had some off the field issues. I think everybody sort of realized, the anybody that reads the Street Rags or the Meltzers
Right.
or any of that kind of stuff would know that. But at the last time he was on with me, I remember him being I kept him on a long time because it was a sort of a fun conversation for me to have. So Ken Patera pops up on YouTube looking like a 78-year-old version of Ken Patera. His brother, of course, was Jack Patera, who coached the Seattle Seahawks, who's in the
Yes.
NFL. Ken Patera was the world's strongest man. He was an Olympian. He always had Olympic things. He's from Portland, Oregon. He had this curly blonde, bleach blonde hair. He later came back and had a different persona, but he was a strong man. He would be in those strongman competitions on ABC,
Yeah.
carrying tires behind him and like all of that. I mean, he and Superstar Graham were like legitimate weightlifters where Schwarzenegger was coming in, right?
Right.
And so Patera was always good on the mic. He was a great heel, like all of that. Fought Bruno at the end, the whole deal. And one of the first guys I saw wrestle Bruno, Ken Patera. He was the first. Him and Stan Stasiak were the first. After Hansen broke Bruno's neck, I wasn't in on that. The Valiant brothers were the Executioners
Sure.
were a little gone. It was more Samoans getting in then, and Chief J Strongbow.
Chief J Strumbo, Haysex Calhoun, Bobo
H.
Brazil.
Free Adonis, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Who am I? Spiros Arion.
Spears Arian,
Spiros
absolutely.
Arion, right.
Yeah.
So
Turn
Pedro
heel.
Morales, right. So Patera's on YouTube and I click on it and he's talking about Bob Backlund. I'll leave you with this because we're talking about Backlund. He told this story about wrestling Bob for the very first time, that he was trying to, and he was the one that had to teach Bob how to wrestle because he was a wrestler, Ken Patera, right? And so was Bob Backlund in Minnesota. He was a wrestler. Mike Rotundo,
Yeah.
a traditional Greco-Roman. There you go.
Gotcha.
Another Greek
Collegiate.
reference there for you. That's two Greek references in 1 minute there.
That's right. That's
Three if
right.
you count Pappas. So it's all Greek to me. So he tells his story about wrestling Bob Backlund in Wildwood, New Jersey to train Bob. That McMahon's going to put the belt on Bob. He's got a year to train him, get him ready, give him the hype that he needs to be the next Bruno, right? Like that's where the plan was. And he said, Bob beat the feces out of me. He said, Bob didn't know how to wrestle. And he said, I had a busted nose, he said he just didn't know how to do it.
Trying to put the guy
So
over.
go watch that. Because
Yeah.
you love this stuff. Go watch Ken
Yeah.
Patera talking
to see
about
that.
Bob Backlund beating him up. And when you think about Bob Backlund being like tiny next to Ken Patera, the Ken Patera sat there and took mug
Right.
shots,
Trying to teach this kid how to wrestle.
how to not kill each other.
To put him over. Right. So they can do it every night, like Topeka, Kansas, and then Lebanon, PA, Baltimore,
Did
Maryland,
your
etc.
dad die believing it was real?
You know what? When I took when I he no he didn't, because when I took him and he sat him at ringside and he saw it up close and personal, he realized it wasn't real, but he said, I still love it. So I'm glad I didn't take that away from him. Because as a young man, and I wish he did pass away thinking it was real. That's a little bit of regret that I have, but we had a ball going to the arena. He and
I
I.
think my dad still wanted it to be real. You know what I mean?
Well, same. Yeah, I guess my dad was in the same boat. But what fun it was, and those
It
father
was
son
more
memories
fun when
you
I
take
thought it
with
was
you.
real.
Yeah.
That day I took the pictures in '83. I think I might have thought it was real.
No, I never thought it was real. Even as a 9-year-old watching it for the first time, I was like, these guys, these 300-pound guys hitting each other at full force in the face, and I don't see any blood, I don't see any bruises. I'm like, that doesn't look right. Didn't pass the eyeball test then, no more than it passes it now. Of course, now we know we're being put on, we're being entertained, so it is what it is. It was always a great time, Nestor.
Well, the shoot interviews are more fun, Like I go
Well,
back
the whole thing.
yeah, I mean, it's a great.
Especially back then when you didn't have 2,000 channels to pick from. Back
Dennis,
then it was it was a big deal at 4 p.m. on a Saturday.
other than seeing the rock bands that are still worth seeing that aren't dead, right? Like I've seen Pat Benatar and Chrissy Hind on stage within 50 feet of me in the last 4 weeks, like I get joy out of that. I'm getting real joy out of watching everyone else have a good time with the Orioles. I'm not sure I really want to get squirted out there. You and I talked about this in May. Maybe, like maybe it's better on TV. I mean, no one's going to the games this week, and that's tragic, right? And that's going to be used against us. Promise. Note that. Mid-August, Nestor says lack of fans will be used against the fan
Of
base.
course, of course.
The New York Times writer was on, but the fun that people are having with the Orioles and the true joy I see from people our age who have suffered and struggled. I had Alan McCallum on. He's had a really rough year off the field. So a lot of family things going on in his life that's kept him from coming on every week and talking about the Orioles with me, real life stuff. And Alan's great and he's good and you go listen to him. But for those of you who've listened to me for 25 years, to be able to catch up with Alan and talk about a first place baseball team, something I've dreamed
That's
about.
good stuff. Good
whether
stuff.
I'm mistreated or treated well, or whether John's mistreating everybody, and he is, and that I have to go and scribe and be one of the few people emboldened and empowered to actually tell the truth about all of this stuff. But the hope for the Ravens, the swirl around the Ravens, mixed in with whatever the Orioles are going to be here in the coming weeks, and the lease. I mean, I take joy out of all of this, but the fact that wrestling and rock and roll and the Oriole cartoon bird and Rick Dempsey opening a new batting clinic down in Columbia, like seeing stuff from 40 years ago that still means a lot, and wrestling means a lot. Like Terry Funk was all over my webpage on Wednesday when he passed away, everywhere.
Yeah, of course he was.
No. And I remember the night 40 years ago that my parents took me to St. Louis, and I'm like, that's Terry Funk. I only see him in the magazines.
That's right.
Because in 1983, it was the only time in my life. I mean, seeing Ric Flair and Harley race up close, like, that was Lightfall. I mean, that they were larger than life, literally. And Hulk Hogan was just about to do Thunder Lips.
Nice.
He was in that Thunder Lips.
Yeah,
he was really
the Rocky era.
The star. Oh yeah.
No, great stuff, Nestor. Appreciate the storytelling and glad that we kept it on wrestling. Terry Funk deserved the segment. Put it through that way.
And God protect Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan.
That's right. May they always be well. There he goes, Nestor J. Aparicio, doing great things, traveling, going to Pappas as you should too. We'll take a quick break and come back right after this.